Hi, Emily.
Hello, hi Inderpal. How are you doing? Thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much for coming. I just want to say to everybody listening, please offer Inderpal your full attention and of course enjoy. I'll join you for a short Q&A after the presentation.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I'm Inderpal Bhandari. I'm the Global Chief Data Officer of IBM. And we've been on a journey, a transformation journey at IBM for the last several years. I've been personally involved with that journey a little over 5 years now. And the one thing that's happened most recently with the pandemic is that we've seen that 10 years of digitization is occurring in under 1 year. And that's happening because enterprises are becoming very aware that they need to digitize or they'll be left behind. Next slide, please. Data challenges are a key aspect of what makes transformation hard. And the data challenges occur because of complexity. The data can be in many different places. An average enterprise ends up, on average, an enterprise ends up using 9 to 11 clouds. And so you can imagine how siloed the data gets. An enterprise, on average, will make several acquisitions as well. And then each time there's an acquisition, the data will be distinct from the data that existed in the enterprise previously, coming from the acquisition. So the complexity is just a natural part of what happens in an enterprise. And then there is also the aspect of growth of data, because data is growing as the enterprise goes through more and more experience with clients, with employees, with partners, etc. And then that data increases 6x is our estimate annually. And finally, there is the aspect of compliance. The EU GDPR regulation, for instance, it imposes fines up to 4% of annual turnover, which is very significant if you start thinking in terms of the annual turnovers of large enterprises being in the billions of dollars. So, and when that happens, you have to establish that you were in compliance. In fact, it's even better to be in compliance, but to do all that, your data has to be in order. So when these compliance regulations which are now gathering more and more speed, as well as occurring globally now, you have to be able to respond. So these are the challenges that arise purely from a data lens when you look at transformation. Next slide. A key aspect of the transformation is all around AI, artificial intelligence, or augmented intelligence as we refer to it at IBM. And the reason we refer to it as augmented intelligence is, in our mind, there's always a human in the loop. Not because that's something that we believe in philosophically, but we know that from an enterprise standpoint, when you have decision making going on in enterprises, the decision maker has to be comfortable with whatever's being recommended. And so there is going to be a human in the loop. Otherwise, if they don't understand the decision or they don't trust it, they're not going to adhere to that decision. They won't listen to the AI system. So just a quick background on what we mean by AI. So from a system attribute standpoint, an AI system, there are 4 things that I would recommend you consider. One is the system has to be an expert at something. It could be a field, like the medical field. It could be a specific aspect of the medical field, like diagnosis of a certain disease condition. It could be an entire area, like the finance area, for instance. It could be a process, like the supply chain process. But the system has to be an expert at something. So that's one. The second E is expression. You'll notice that the 4 are basically in 4 E's. The second E is expression. Because of the point that I raised earlier, the system has to be able to explain itself to a human decision maker. So it must be able to naturally communicate with a human decision maker. And that means, the kind of natural language that we use, whether it be spoken, written, or a diagram that somebody puts up to explain something, the system has to be able to do those types of things. Otherwise, the decision maker won't listen. Just think in terms of a surgeon or gets a recommendation from an AI system saying you need to amputate a leg. This is not going to be easily accepted. It has to be thoroughly understood, all the options evaluated, and so forth. And the system has to be able to do all that, hence the expression. The third E has to do with education. So these systems are taught not by being programmed per se, but actually by being shown examples and data and edge cases. So we kind of educate them, we teach them in that manner. And so we learn from them as they learn from us. And this is kind of the power of the method. So then it's different from the paradigms that existed in the past, where you would have to either hard code, intelligence into a system, or put in some business rules and all that stuff. But here, these systems actually learn from what they're being given with regard to data and instances that the user is feeding them, or that they are just picking up through the experience that the system is going through. And lastly, these systems evolve as they see these new edge cases, as they get the new data, they actually evolve, they learn more, and they become better and better at doing things. And they do all this at enormous scale, which is what allows us to address a lot of the complexity with regard to the growth of data that I alluded to before. One of the additional things that we've discovered as we've gone through our transformation journey is that these systems must foster trust. And some of the reasons I already alluded to, but we kind of encapsulate it in these 5 things that I have up on the slide. They've got to be transparent. And that also has to do with the fact that the system is learning. It's learning about the company, it's learning about the process. In a nutshell, it's learning about the intellectual property of the company. So if it's not fully transparent as to how that's going to be used, an enterprise will not trust the system, will not trust the vendor that's providing the system, because there's a danger of disintermediation. The system has to be able to explain its choices. We went through that. It's got to be robust, because these systems can be attacked adversarially. There are plenty of examples in which, some of these systems will be very mistaken in what they end up recognizing just by making a slight tweak to an image. So there's that robustness aspect. There's robustness around the models, around keeping them fresh, the data being accurate and trusted, and so forth. Also fairness. If they're used to analyze consumers, for instance, so people, the decisions have to be fair. For instance, if this has to do with making a decision about giving somebody a loan, it's got to be done fairly. If it's done about hiring someone, got to be done fairly. So when it comes down to use cases that involve people, the aspect of fairness becomes critical, in fact. And finally, privacy, because these systems also deal with and learn from data that potentially can be sensitive, and they're also taking that data, learning from that data, they're making inferences from that data, and you kind of don't know where that inferences can go. You have to be very careful that the privacy of the individuals, again, if the data has to do with consumers and people, then the privacy has to be protected. And it's not just privacy at the level of the data itself, where we've got some sensitive attributes where you can essentially reveal the identity of the person, but also privacy with regard to the inference that's made, so that you're not able to, somehow engineer the identity of the person based on everything that you're seeing through inference. So these aspects have all got to be addressed. Next slide. Now, as you can imagine, there's a lot of complexity in setting up a system like that in an enterprise. And so what we started doing when I joined IBM about 5.5 years ago now, was we essentially decided to make IBM itself into an AI enterprise and to apply artificial intelligence across the enterprise. And so our journey over these last few years is depicted in this slide. And that experiential aspect of actually implementing what we were doing at IBM in terms of the products that we were building. So we were kind of client zero for all those products. That experience has been invaluable in shaping our view of what AI looks like in an enterprise and how we should be able to support our customers. So I'll tell you a little bit about that story as we go through this, and then also touch on the customers that have been using our framework based on this experience, as well as then based on their experience, the packaging of the products that we've got now and why we have arrived at that particular way of looking at things. I think all that will become clear as we go through the rest of this presentation. So the first year was all around the data strategy. And so the data strategy was followed by building an actual AI enterprise. And what we came up with there was we derived an understanding of what it means for an enterprise to be an AI enterprise. Essentially, it means that you have to infuse AI into every business process at every level. Wherever there's a decision being made that requires human judgment, usually that's collective human judgment, there is essentially scope for AI to improve that decision making. And this is not necessarily at the highest levels. In fact, I would argue that it applies at every level in the enterprise. And one of the examples that I like to use is when we have somebody in my organization who's trying to decide whether or not a client that we are dealing with is a government-owned entity, because there are different rules and regulations that govern how you interact with government-owned entities. Then that it's a critical decision. It's usually made by doing some research, by consulting with our lawyers, by consulting with our sales folks, who have divergent opinions on what that should be. Then eventually the decision is made. Well, now with these AI systems, you're actually able to scan whatever is happening in real time on the internet. So the research is much more thorough, and these systems are able to infer things like the founder of this company sits on a high-ranking government committee, which otherwise may have been missed, may not even have registered in the decision. So you end up making a much more accurate decision, and also much more quickly, because once you're able to marshal all these facts effectively, the discussions with the sales team and the legal team, that becomes much quicker. So, and that's not a decision at a very high level, it's a low level, but there are literally thousands and thousands of these decisions that are made every day at an enterprise. And that's what you must be able to do in the different business processes of the enterprise. You have to be able to infuse AI so that you're able to make it more effective. The last 3 years have been around essentially making it easier for our clients to make use of what we have done within IBM, tap into our experience, so they don't repeat those same mistakes, they don't go through the same pain points, etc. And we acquired Red Hat in 2019. That was essentially to handle some of that complexity around data as it exists across different clouds, like I alluded to, right? An enterprise on average will make use of 9 to 11 clouds. So Red Hat, especially, the OpenShift product that Red Hat has, allows portability across all clouds. It allows you to be cloud agnostic. It allows you to operate in a way that you're able to then focus on the work that needs to be done, as opposed to the actual portability aspects of the system that you have. And then finally, in 2020 and 2021, we're focused on the hybrid cloud, which is now a mix of public clouds as well as private clouds, as well as on-prem data centers. And you want to be able to appropriately manage through that environment so that you can access data from anywhere, again, appropriately. You're able to write code once and run it anywhere, again, appropriately. The reason I keep saying appropriately is different regulations in different countries, they can be quite divergent. And so data that I'm looking at from the USA may be fine, but when I'm in Germany, that may not be fine. So all these things have to get factored in, which kind of introduces more complexity as you start looking at the hybrid cloud scenario. But on the other hand, it also allows you to transform very quickly, because enterprises, like I alluded to earlier, through acquisitions and through global operations are already, they have these siloed data, which needs to get brought together so that you can create applications of value to create business value. Next slide, please. So just a bit about our experience, what we've learned, the data strategy is kind of critical. It has to be set up early on in the whole journey. I typically say you have about 6 months to put down a data strategy that's closely linked and tied to your business strategy for there to be an actual impact that has huge strategic value for the company. And if that doesn't happen, if you've kind of missed that time interval, then it becomes more of a tactical exercise, because then it becomes all about essentially fixing aspects of the data that the business is trying to use in a very tactical manner. But so what do I mean by aligned to the business strategy? Well, you kind of first figure out what the business strategy is. So what is that? That has to do with how a company plans to make money, not necessarily how it's making money today, but how it plans to make money. So in the case of IBM, when I joined, we made money from mainframes, from software, etc. But it became very clear that we wanted to make money from cloud and AI. That was going to be our strategy. So our data strategy became one of actually making IBM itself an AI enterprise, right? We kind of did that because we said, we don't really quite understand AI from an enterprise context, so let's do it ourselves. That'll promote our whole strategy around cloud and AI, as well as internally give us the experience as client zero of what needs to be done. So that's the example of a data strategy. So that's kind of, and it's different for different companies. I've done this CDO job 4 times now, and it's been different in each company. But it's very critical that step be done, that it be accepted by the senior leadership, and then you can start the actual implementation. Along with that, once you've got the data strategy done, you've essentially got to come up with the enterprise data governance frameworks, and the data strategy guides you to that, which is why it needs to be done first. So once we knew that we're focused on AI, unstructured data also had to be governed. So we would never have known that if we didn't do the data strategy first. So systematically you're able to then come up with frameworks to govern the data. And some of the data you want to control very rigorously and to standards. The comments I made about where you have data that's completely distributed, usually then that data is also being interpreted differently, it's expressed differently. And so some of that data, you can use AI to actually surface where those ambiguities are, and you're then able to standardize that data so that it becomes much more coherent. And so then for that data, you impose those standards and make that very rigorous. Again, so you see the sequence 1, 2, 3. They 1 leads to 2, leads to 3. So in a sense, you have to follow that sequence. And then 4 and 5 can be done concurrently with 1. In fact, they should be building relationships across the organization so that you can actually put this whole strategy in place, and when you start implementing it and the business leaders are accepting, so those relationships have to be built up. And then finally, talent is very difficult to acquire in this area. Some of the AI talent and some of the more esoteric methods, like in deep learning, reinforcement learning, etc., there are not that many people who can actually practice it. There are there are people doing very good research on it, but in terms of actually applying it, practicing it, not that many. So and you have to find those people, and you have to be ready with them so that this can move forward. Next slide, please. Then we also learned that as part of the transformation, we didn't just need to worry about data, and technology, right? Not just data, not just AI technology, not just clouds, not just making sure that the data is trusted, not just making sure that we've got the capability to do large numbers of deep learning experiments. So our interconnect is very fast between the GPUs and the data stores. So all that stuff is there. That's data, that's technology. We also have to worry about the processes, because remember I said you have to infuse the data into the process itself. So that automation, that intelligent automation, you have to start worrying about that. And then again, that leads to another set of complexities around process. And finally, people. The people have to be educated, trained, and ready to and receptive to work with AI systems. It's not that that it's that hard, but they just have to go through that process to become comfortable with getting options from an AI system, evaluating it, and then deciding to accept it or not accept it and move forward with their decision making. So the training, the retraining, the hiring of some people, and the whole culture change around moving to a data-driven culture, that becomes extremely significant aspect of this. So, and all four of these pillars, data, people, process, technology, have to move at the same time. If one moves too far ahead, then this essentially breaks down in the sense that you slow up until the other ones catch up. So we kind of learned all that. Next slide, please. Final results, just to give you a snapshot of kind of what ended up happening with all this. So we've touched every major business process at IBM. You see some of the examples on the slide in front of you, which basically will, you see areas like supply chain, like finance, like sales, like marketing, etc. So pretty much every major process within the company making use of AI, enabled through the platforms that we created around data and AI enablement. And then that central platform essentially made it easy for people to not just access data, but also ended up also in terms of infusing AI into their business processes. The main improvement that we saw from a metric standpoint, from an outcome standpoint, was the end-to-end cycle time across these complex processes through the enterprise, big global enterprise like IBM, on average, 70% improvement across these major processes. So you can see that there's huge gains that are possible by doing this. And also, making use of crown jewel data in this kind of hybrid environment, how one does that, how one makes that accessible appropriately on the different clouds that we're using with proper authentication and privacy, all that stuff is part of this implementation. And that kind of forms our experiential base of what we did. Next slide. And then our clients, who we've been working with simultaneously, as you can see here, there are lots of clients. They've been working this stuff too, and together with us, and we've been learning with them. They've been learning from us, and some patterns have emerged, which I want to call to your attention. On the right, you see the major use cases that our clients are actually using AI and data for in terms of the digital transformation that they've been having good success with and leading with. So that's customer care, financial planning, employee experience, business operations, IT operations. These 5 use case areas we found to be a sweet spot. And then on the left, you kind of see what are the generic capabilities that they've ended up with as they went through the transformation. And that has to do with the intelligent automation, the ability to predict, to become much more predictive, to secure, and also to be agile. Right? So generic capabilities that can then be applied across the different processes, but with these 5, areas, the 5 major, under those areas, there are several business processes, but those 5 areas being the ones where they've kind of focused. Next slide, please. And then what we learned from all this is to simplify this, right? To simplify the creation of the generic capabilities, to be able to provide those types of the kind of simple support that's needed to be able to drive those use cases. We have the stuff in the middle that has to do with our transformation initiatives and expertise. At the bottom, the use of Red Hat OpenShift that takes away the complexity around dealing with different clouds and be they private, public, or data centers. And then the cloud packs, which is our AI for business, capability. And those simplify the complexities that I had highlighted around data and AI. So next slide, please. And you can see that here, the different cloud packs, essentially they encapsulate capabilities that help you address the complexities, both around data, right, around the stuff I'd said about complexity, proliferation, and so forth, And then also around AI, the trust, the fairness, the robustness, all that stuff that needs to be taken care of. So that we provide a framework there for you to address all that complexity, which sits on top of OpenShift, which addresses the complexity around the different clouds. And then what we further learned is you also need, in addition to that, as you move forward with this, are various industry-specific accelerators. So for instance, if you're doing claims processing, there are certain patterns that emerge, and you can use those accelerators. Once you've learned what those are, you can actually build them on top of what we've provided here as part of the framework for AI for business. And then finally, to completely open up the ecosystem so that we are able to help our customers leverage their partners to bring to bear the innovation at much, much greater speeds than any one vendor can do. Because we've realized, again, that it's a complex space. By essentially making it amenable for an open ecosystem, it's going to make things move much, much faster. So next slide. Yeah, that's the picture with regard to the open, inclusive ecosystem. Literally, there are large numbers of partners and major partners. You can see some of the names there on the slide that kind of work with us because they extend out of our Cloud Pak environment, which basically addresses the complexities around data, around AI, around integration, around automation, around security. Next slide. And that's the presentation. Please, what I would suggest is visiting our website, also grabbing our slide set, and if there's any way that we can help you on your journey, we'd love to do it. Thank you.
And that's brilliant. Thank you. Hi, Inderpal, and welcome back. I just want to say thank you so much for your presentation today. It was truly fascinating. I'm sure everyone listening found it very insightful. I would just like to move into a short Q&A now with you, kind of just off the back of your presentation. This is kind of maybe a more personal question towards you, but I was kind of wondering, what is your biggest business priority right now?
Yes, no, that's a great question. My biggest priority, and I think it's for our whole company, is to help our clients accelerate their journey towards digital transformation. And it's because we've realized from the last year that it's an imperative. It's one of those things where you either do it now or you're going to be left behind from a business standpoint. And we've also had this tremendous experience just doing it internally, and we've learned so much from that experience. Our products have evolved through not just our experience, but also the clients that have been in early and that have taken those early blows with us and suffered through those pain points. But now we realize we're at a point where with the investment, we've invested over $1 billion in the open ecosystem, and the packaging around the different complexities that we talked about, right? We've kind of appreciated that if you don't do this, it's going to be very difficult to actually implement it in an enterprise context. You could do it in the context of, consumer, in the consumer space, but in the enterprise space, it's going to be very, very difficult to do that. So so now that we've got this stuff put together like this and we can tap back on that experience, that's our main goal, to really push the ecosystem, the product set, and help our clients get there faster.
Absolutely. And of course, I suppose this brings in a lot of factors regarding kind of change management and lots of leadership. So I guess that brings me to our next question, which is, how should companies get ready for this new era of digital reinvention?
Yeah, no, again, another very great question. I think the first thing I would say is, if you go back to that slide where I kind of showed those 5 use cases with customer care, financial planning, etc., if you're a company and you are not active on those 5 use case spaces with AI, if you haven't made that leap and transformation into that, you should definitely attempt to do that very quickly, because we see a lot of traction in that space. And then if you're already there, then I would look to the left side and say, do I have these generic capabilities? Because that's what you're going to need to be able to then transform the rest of your enterprise. And then finally, I'd point you back to once you've done, if you're on your way to doing all that, I'd point you back to that AI enterprise blueprint slide, and say those are the 4 aspects you have to worry about and make sure that they march forward together. And again, we're here to help. We're eager to share what we know about this space now, and we understand what it means for an enterprise to be an AI enterprise. And we'd love to, we just love working with our clients and moving them forward.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a kind of great note to end on there. So I just want to thank you so much, Inderpal, for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure. Was there any final words or anything you wanted to say? Plug your social media or anything for our audience today?
Yeah, no, again, any questions, please link in with me. I'm on LinkedIn. And also you can go to the website and we'll be happy to help you on your journey.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Inderpal. It's great to have you with us. And obviously, I hope everyone out there listening enjoyed his presentation. So thank you again, and I'll see you shortly.